welcome back, everyone. This is Radio Free Market, and before the break, Chris, you started a question to Dr. Prentice. Please go ahead.
All right. Well, Dr. Prentice, I guess in a nutshell, what do you say to people that say that capitalism is evil because it promotes things like greed and profits over people?
Well, the first thing I say is if you don't like human greed, you have to take it up with the manufacturer. The fact is, we are hardwired for what we would call self-interest, a better way of saying that word. And Adam Smith's entire idea here was that we needed the enlightened self-interest. It really comes from the Scottish Enlightenment and several philosophers before and concurrent with Adam Smith. But enlightened self-interest means that we pursue our self-interest as long as we don't get in the way of other people expressing their self-interest, and hence we get this voluntary system. So it's very important that we understand it's not greed. Greed, coveting, or taking what doesn't belong to you, what is not rightfully yours. Well, it's not greedy to try to make money, especially if the money is made by voluntary exchange. So it's a completely different way of looking at that word. And as you mentioned with Socrates, our definitions are sort of backwards or upside down or perhaps on purposefully skewed to make nonsense out of what is really very sensible. It's greed. It's the left that's greedy. They covet our money and our income. They want to take it from us by force and violence. Is that not greed? How are they less greedy than I, who has made my money by voluntary trade in exchange with my fellow man?
Yeah, I think to that effect,
I'm insulted when they call me greedy.
Right. Well, exactly, because I think to that effect, Thomas Sowell has a very nice saying that he's always mystified why it's never greedy to want to spend someone else's money, but the moment you want to spend your own, then you're hounded down as being greedy.
Tom Sowell, he's brilliant, isn't he?
Absolutely.
That's great. Well, you know, Paul, the question of exploiting workers and consumers is one of the most widespread arguments used against capitalism. How do you counter this argument?
Well, again, it's a matter of definition of terms, isn't it? Well, I would ask somebody to say, define to me what you mean by exploit. You know, define that term. Is it exploiting somebody? If they're willing to work for me for $10 an hour and I'm willing to pay them $10 an hour, is exploiting them if they're willing to work for me for $8 an hour and I'm willing to pay them $8 an hour? How is that exploiting them? So the term itself, exploitation, you find that it's a vacuous term. There's nothing behind it. It's a very emotional term. It pulls at the heartstrings, but it has no real meaning. There's no meaning in the world that I live in where people engage in voluntary trade. The only exploitation occurs when somebody puts a gun to my head and tries to take my money.
Do you run into that particular concept with the students that you are with in college, Chris?
A fair bit. I mean, and I really do think that the problem simply is that they don't really understand exactly what it is that we're talking about. There really isn't an agreement on pinning down what the precise definition is. Because once you think about it and you really, explain to them, like Dr. Prentice has been saying, I mean, at that point they begin to realize that, well, my position really doesn't make as much sense anymore. So it's definitely a widespread sentiment in colleges.
So please go ahead, Chris.
So I guess we've kind of discussed some of the beneficial consequences of capitalism and free markets. I know Adam Smith has his famous concept of the invisible hand. Another related insight is Frederick Hayek's perspective about dispersed knowledge. And his idea was that only markets could coordinate all of the information needed to run something as complex as an economy. And I think that's something that's overlooked a lot, and especially when we're talking about things like exploitation of workers and things like that. Because if workers are being exploited, then the question is, well, how much should they be paid instead? And I guess, Dr. Prentice, I should ask you, can governments actually know what the just price or the just wage is for a worker?
That's ultimately what Hayek himself called the fatal conceit, the idea that government could know any such set of information. Consider this, not only how complex the economy is. Let's take a simple thing out of that economy, and you're familiar with the SAI pencil. A pencil is so common and so cheap that you walk past one discarded on the street, you don't even bother to pick it up. But yet it's a modern marvel of metallurgy, of engineering, of manufacture, of agronomy, of shipping, of mining. Think of all the things that go into it. And there's not one human being on the earth, not one, that knows the entire process, start to finish, of making a pencil. Yet it happens without any government control. It happens by thousands of people pursuing their enlightened self-interest, given their resource base, their understanding of their opportunity costs, their own values and their trade-offs. And the next thing you know, there's pencils all around us. It's just phenomenal. And that's just a pencil. And if the government couldn't plan a pencil, how could it plan an economy?
Right, exactly. You know, this essay you mentioned, I'd like to emphasize to all the listeners that they should, if they can, look this particular essay up, Pencil, and it was written. It's available online in a free PDF from multiple different sites, and it's one of the most wonderful lessons about cooperation and prosperity and how we don't need to know anyone else. In fact, we're never going to know all the different people that help us become prosperous. It's a spontaneous ordering of society. And again, folks, we are coming into another segment, the end of a segment here, and so please stay with us. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes. And so this is Radio Free Market, and I'm your host, Michael McKay. I'll talk to you in just a minute. Thank you.